Pickle Rick arrives at the therapist's office without glory. He doesn't walk in like the smartest man in the universe. He comes in dragging the remains of a lie that got out of hand. His body is covered in poorly closed wounds, his breathing is heavy, and there's a persistent smell about him. Sewer water, stagnant dampness, something that has survived far too long underground. He sits across from the doctor like someone who has already used up every escape route. He doesn't look defeated by the world. He looks defeated by the effort of running away. Because this moment didn't start here. It started much earlier in an ordinary kitchen with a decision as small as it was cowardly, not going to therapy. Pickle Rick is born there, not as a joke, not as an innocent experiment, but as a deliberate act of avoidance. Rick doesn't wake up as a pickle by accident. He becomes one because he can, because it's easier to redesign your entire body than to sit down and talk about what hurts. Pickle Rick is an excuse elevated to a masterpiece, the ultimate proof of how far someone is willing to go when they refuse to face a conversation. And all of us, if we're honest, recognize that impulse. Not to turn ourselves into a pickle, of course, but to become anything at all just so we don't have to be where we're supposed to be. The problem with well-constructed lies is that they begin to demand coherence. Once Rick is a pickle, he can't simply stay still. The house empties, the world keeps turning, and then something small but decisive happens: the rain. Water comes in through the window, drags the pickle across the floor, pushes him out of the safety of home, and throws him into a world that doesn't forgive. That moment is key, because Pickle Rick doesn't fall into chaos as divine punishment, but as a natural consequence. That's how avoidance works. It doesn't destroy you immediately. It slowly slides you into increasingly hostile places. The sewer isn't just a setting. It's a brutal symbol. Dark, damp, infested, underground. Pickle Rick ends up there because that's what happens when you choose not to face things. You end up living beneath everything. And there, reduced to the bare minimum, Rick does the only thing he knows how to do: survive. He doesn't reflect, he doesn't stop, he adapts. He uses rot corpses as an exoskeleton, turns bones into weapons, builds a grotesque version of himself out of whatever he finds. It's impressive, it's repulsive, and it's deeply sad, because every act of ingenuity is another step farther away from the truth. The fight with the rats isn't just absurd violence, it's a statement. Rick proves that even in his most pathetic form, he can dominate his environment. That even without arms, without legs, without dignity, he is still superior. And that demonstration matters to him because it sustains the central lie: I don't need anyone. I don't need to talk. I don't need to change. The rats represent everything Rick despises: the basic, the instinctive, the thing that only wants to survive. And by defeating them, Rick convinces himself that his path, however horrible, is still preferable to sitting on a couch and admitting fear. This is a good moment to pause, because this part of the story is uncomfortable. It shows us something we don't like to admit. We are capable of enduring terrible conditions just to avoid facing what truly hurts us. We put up with jobs we hate, empty relationships, routines that slowly wither us, all to avoid an honest conversation. Pickle Rick isn't an exaggeration, he's a mirror. The escape intensifies when Rick leaves the sewer and enters an even more violent world. The confrontation with the Russian mercenaries, led by Jaguar, isn't a gratuitous plot twist. It's the point where avoidance reaches its most epic form. Rick is no longer just surviving, he's proving something. Every trap, every kill, every calculated move is a way of screaming at the universe: look what I can do to avoid facing myself. And the universe, cruel but honest, lets him do it. The final fight is glorious, choreographed, brutal. Pickle Rick, armed with scraps, defeats trained men, humiliates professional killers, becomes a subterranean legend. And as we watch him win, something starts to feel wrong. Because all of this, all this brilliance, has no purpose other than avoiding a therapy session. Rick has turned emotional avoidance into a bloody epic. And seen up close, that isn't strength, it's desperation. Jaguar, the Russian assassin, isn't just an antagonist, he's a reflection. A man shaped by violence, defined by loss, held together by a narrative of extreme survival. The difference is that Jaguar accepts his pain as his origin. Rick denies it. And in that contrast, Pickle Rick wins the physical battle, but loses something deeper. Because even when he saves Jaguar, even when he briefly connects, he doesn't allow himself to stay. He doesn't allow himself to feel. He moves on, always forward, always away. And then, when everything suggests that Rick has won, the real twist happens. Rick goes to therapy, not as a victorious pickle, but as someone who has spent all his energy avoiding where he was supposed to be. And there, Beth is waiting for him, not with shouting, not with violence, with a simple and devastating condition. If he wants to remain part of her life, he has to go to therapy. There's no exaggerated emotional blackmail. There's a boundary, and boundaries are the natural enemy of avoidance. Here, the central truth of Pickle Rick is revealed. Rick doesn't go to therapy because he learned his lesson. He goes because his lie is no longer sustainable. Because even for someone capable of surviving sewers and armies, avoiding the inevitable always has a cost. And this time, that cost is losing his daughter. Rick chooses to go, voluntarily, but he does so wounded, filthy, exhausted, not as a victor, but as someone who understands, too late, that no escape is ever free. This is the story of Pickle Rick, not that of an eccentric genius, but of avoidance taking to its ultimate consequences. Because there are truths you can't dodge, and when they arrive, they don't come with violence. They arrive with silence, with a sentence, and with the certainty that everything we did to avoid facing them is now staring straight back at us. And before we continue, let me tell you something. If you thought this story was dark, we're only scratching the surface. Because there are characters who pass before us as noise, as faceless action, yet hide something far more disturbing. Jaguar is one of them. His story is quiet, violent, and deeply tragic. A life marked by obedience, stolen identity, and a brutality that didn't begin with him, but was imposed on him. If you want us to tell the hidden and terrifying story of Jaguar, leave your like right now. And if this video reaches 10,000 likes, we'll make it as soon as possible, with the same level of depth, rawness, and reflection you're hearing now. Rick walks in, not like a hero, not like a brilliant scientist, not like the smartest man in the universe. He walks in as what he is in that moment, a battered pickle, his body marked by violence, his skin stained with the dried blood of rats and men, and a gaze that no longer shines with arrogance, but with exhaustion. Every step is clumsy, unnatural, almost humiliating, but it's his. No one carries him, no one pushes him. Rick arrives on his own at the place he spent the entire day avoiding. And there, in that minimal gesture, lies the truth that hurts. Rick didn't lose. Rick survived. And surviving doesn't always feel like victory. The therapist's office is silent, orderly, uncomfortably normal. There are no portals, no gunshots, no screams. After absolute chaos, that silence weighs heavier than any weapon. Pickle Rick moves across the spotless floor like a living anomaly, like a joke that was stretched too far until it became unsettling. His very presence is absurd, yes, but also deeply sad, because everything he just did, everything he endured, everything he overcame, was only to avoid being there. Sometimes we believe our greatest efforts are aimed at gaining something, when in reality they're aimed at avoiding something. Avoiding a conversation, avoiding an emotion, avoiding looking at ourselves without defenses. And Rick, with all his genius, is no different. He's just more creative in his escape. Dr. Wong watches him without surprise. She doesn't look at him like a phenomenon or a threat. She looks at him for what he is, someone who has reached the limit of his own avoidance. Rick speaks from within the pickle with his usual tone, sarcasm, contempt, that voice that tries to remind the world he's still above it all. But something has already changed. The irony sounds hollow. The wit no longer impresses because his body gives him away. The escape was so extreme it left visible scars. Then she speaks, and she doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. Her words aren't loaded with anger, but with clarity. "You're the most dangerous person in the world, Rick Sanchez. You can blow up a galaxy, but you can't fix what matters most, and you know it. That's what makes you a coward." There's no immediate reply. Not because Rick has nothing to say, but because for the first time he can't hide behind what he knows. The sentence doesn't attack him from the outside. It pierces him from within, because it doesn't point at his power, it points at his fear. And that's the blow no genius can dodge. Rick turned his avoidance into a masterpiece. He transformed denial into an epic adventure. He made a spectacle of resistance and violence out of his inability to face his emotions. And all that time, he told himself he was winning. But there, standing before someone who isn't competing with him, something brutally human is exposed. All that effort wasn't to save himself, it was to avoid sitting down. This is where this story stops being only about Rick, because we all have our own version of that pickle. We've all exaggerated an escape until it became an identity. We tell ourselves we're busy, that it's not the right time, that it's not worth it, that this is just how we are. And meanwhile, we fight unnecessary wars to avoid the one that truly matters. The quietest one, the one that can't be won with strength or ingenuity. Rick doesn't turn back into a human, not yet. He remains a pickle throughout the session, as if he unconsciously knows becoming human again would mean accepting something he's not ready to carry. And that too is honest. Real change doesn't happen when someone confronts you. It happens when you choose not to run after you've been seen. The session doesn't end with redemption. There are no tears, no deep confessions. There's something more uncomfortable, partial acceptance. Rick was there. Not how he wanted, not how he planned, not how he imagined, but he was there. And sometimes that's the most we can give after years of running. To be present, even halfway. To stay, even when it hurts. When they leave, Beth looks at him with a mix of exhaustion and love. There are no speeches, just the practical gesture of returning him to his human form. And when Rick comes back, so do the mockery, the nervous laughter, the need to minimize what just happened. Because that's how avoidance works. Even after being exposed, it tries to regain control. Rick jokes. Rick laughs. Rick acts as if nothing has changed. But something has changed, even if he won't admit it, even if he hides it from himself. Pickle Rick isn't the moment when Rick learns the lesson. It's the moment when the lesson becomes impossible to ignore. It doesn't transform him immediately. It marks him. It shows him that he can survive anything except emotional honesty without paying a price. And that no matter how far he goes, no matter how many monsters he defeats, he will always end up facing what he avoided. Because the inevitable doesn't always catch up to you with violence. Sometimes it waits for you, sitting in silence while you arrive on foot, wounded, exhausted, still disguised as the thing you invented so you wouldn't have to feel. And when that happens, it no longer matters how clever the escape was. What matters is whether you have the courage to stay a little longer, even if you're still trembling, even if, for now, you're still a pickle. And if this story leaves us with anything, it's not a grand lesson or a comforting moral. It's a quiet, almost uncomfortable warning.
We don't always run because we're weak. Many times we run because we're brilliant at justifying it, because we know how to build excuses so complex, so ingenious, so well constructed that even we end up believing them. But the truth is simple, and that's why it hurts. What you avoid doesn't disappear, it just waits. And the farther you run, the more expensive the return becomes. Maybe you won't turn into a pickle to avoid a conversation. Maybe you'll just distract yourself. Maybe you'll overwork. Maybe you'll pretend everything's fine. Maybe you'll convince yourself it's not a big deal. But if something in this story resonated with you, if at some point you felt you were watching more than just a cartoon, then here's the advice no one wants to hear, but everyone needs. Don't wait until you're broken to sit down. Don't wait until running leaves you without strength. Sometimes the bravest act isn't enduring everything. It's staying when all you want to do is leave. And if you made it this far, if this story spoke to you, if it made you think about your own escapes, then this space is yours too. Subscribe, because here we keep exploring stories that entertain us, but also confront us. Comment on what part hit you the hardest, what interpretation you saw, or what story you'd like us to analyze next. And if you know someone who always seems to be running from something, maybe this video is the most honest way to tell them you're not alone. Because in the end, all of us, at some point, arrive on foot at the place we were avoiding. The difference is whether we choose to stay.